Hello fellow modelers, Bruce here. A while back, as part of my series of videos on kit manufacturers of old, we covered the Campbell scale models, and early on in that video I mentioned that in my opinion the directions for their kits are minimalist, is the way I described it, and that often, because of that minimal set of instructions, you had to rely on the diagrams that they provided more than the printed instructions and use a technique that I called stare and compare. I said you would stare at the model that you're building. In my case, I'm currently working on their covered bridge, and compare that with the drawings and whatever print material sent you to the drawings in the first place. The other thing that you often have to use stare and compare on is to stare at the parts that you have left still to use and the drawing and try to figure out what those parts are and where they go. So I thought in this video I'd just show you a good example of that from this current build that I'm doing on the covered bridge. But first I'm going to just do a little travel back in time to that earlier video on Campbell scale models and see exactly what I said. After that, we'll come back and take a look at the example in this build. I would say this: their instructions are minimalist, and you have to rely on reading a step in the instructions and then scouring the diagrams and pictures, which are very good, and then sometimes you can make sense out of it. I have built a number of these, so I speak from experience. It is not typically what I would suggest somebody start with when they get out into building models from kit form, especially wood models. But if you have a couple under your belt and you are good at the practice of stare and compare, stare at the model you're making and compare it to the diagram that's provided, you can usually figure out what's going on. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that little time travel back to the earlier video. But now let's look at the example I want to show you in the current build of the covered bridge. Both side trusses are done and the truss rods are installed, and I look at my instructions and say, okay, what's next? And they say, okay, now that your trusses are dry and you've removed them, glue the filler blocks to both the inside and the outside of the top and the bottom beams of both trusses as shown in the drawing. They didn't happen to mention which drawing, but that's what they said. Okay, so what does that mean? What in the world are the filler blocks? Well, this kit had been owned by somebody else, so instead of having the original plastic bags full of parts labeled bag A, bag B, bag C, everything was just loose in the box. And on the bottom of the box were these bits and pieces. And let me just zoom in on them so you can get an idea of how small they are. And I'll put my finger in place so you can see. So my first look at them said, is that just waste material from some part of the build that the previous owner did, and he had these bits and he threw them into the box, or are these to be saved? Well, acting on the side of caution, I saved them and in fact threw them into the alcohol and India ink wash to stain them as well. There are 8 of these real tinier ones and 7 of these. All right. Now we get to this instruction about the filler blocks, and that sent me to look at the drawings. And finally, after looking at them, I see that this drawing, figure 2, down here, let's see if I can get that to I think you can see that now. Oh, filler blocks. And they're pointing to this one, which is a side view, and this one, which is a top view. And I figured out that they are pointing underneath the bolt plate here, this plastic bolt plate that Campbell has provided. So this bolt plate has 4 bolts, no, 5 bolts going down, and the smaller bolt plates just have 3 bolts. Well, let me zoom back out and then we'll talk about those filler blocks more again. It has trouble focusing when you're that far in. The bolt plates are going to get glued right on top of this series of 3 truss rods. They're going to look like the 3 bolts that are going through the plate that are attaching to the truss rods, and you do one top and bottom over all of them. Except apparently, when you look here, except when you get to the end truss rod sets, the bolt plates are the longer ones and have 5 truss rods, which means, although I thought I was done with the truss rods, I have to glue these filler plates or filler blocks in place, top and bottom, front and back. So, and then drill holes through them and put truss rods down and then cover them up with those plates. All of that you had to intuit from the diagrams and what little print sent you over to the diagrams to begin with. Okay, back to these bits and pieces that I saved. And lo and behold, if you take one of these, and this is where the stare and compare comes in, if you take one of these and lay it right on top of the diagram, it's luckily drawn to scale and to size. It covers it perfectly. So, aha, those are the filler blocks. And I need 2, 4, 6, 8 on each side, 16 of them, and I have 7. Okay, that's the problem with buying a used kit. I have 7 of those. Doing some measuring, I see that they are a 1/16 of an inch thick, and they are 5/32 of an inch wide, and then you can cut them to length. And lo and behold, in my stash of parts, and maybe you can read that in the blue ink, I have some strip wood that's 1/16 by 5/32. So what I now have to do is take one of these, get my chopper out, and chop the remaining ones and stain them and then glue them. So I have 7. I needed, what was it, 16? 2, 4, 6, 8, yeah, 16. So I have to cut 9 more pieces of this size and then stain them and then glue them and then drill them, and I can proceed with the rest of the construction. So yeah, that's what I mean by minimalist instructions, and the constant flipping back and forth between what this tells you to do, and mainly it's saying refer to the drawing, and then you have to go searching on the drawing and finding, luckily they're labeled well, and then go back to your parts and see if you can find them. I guess one other quick example of stare and compare. Within this kit there are loads of these boards that have been scribed to look like 4 individual boards glued together. Here's 3 individual boards glued together. Lots of them, different lengths. And in my bottom of the box there were 4 of them that are very similar but very short, but they're all identical lengths. So I said, well, that's not happenstance. They got to be used someplace. So I put them in a baggie, and lo and behold, here I get to another set of steps that basically says to glue the 4 sills to the bottom of the truss assembly, one set on here, one here, and then two on the other side as well. And it referred you to figure 2, which luckily is labeled. And here is one of those 4 sills. And obviously you have to take it and using a sanding stick, file it into this shape and then glue it to the bottom. But, you know, if you didn't, I guess what I'm saying is, you know, if I was creating the instruction sheet, what I would do is put a bill of materials listing everything. You have 4 sills, this is what they look like. You're going to need them in step 12. That doesn't exist here, so you're forced to go back and, you know, compare what you found, in this case in that baggie, wherever I put it over here, to that diagram. And if you put it right on top, you can see, oh, look at that. That's the right length. I just have to sand one side to get that beveled. So, yeah, 2 good examples of what I meant by both minimalist instructions and the technique that I call stare and compare. Well, I thought I was done filming, but then after I turned off the video, something after some staring and comparing became obvious again. If you remember, I had some smaller blocks besides these filler blocks, and I still hadn't figured out what those were for. And then I started getting ready to glue these filler blocks. The bottom main beam is thicker than the top main beam, so, you know, putting this here and getting ready to glue it, oh, it fits perfect. Then when I tried to put a similar size one on the upper beam, it was obvious that that wouldn't fit, and lo and behold, those smaller ones fit perfectly. So I had 8 of those, which is what I need. And let's see, still only have 7 of the bigger ones, so instead of having to make a whole bunch of these up from the strip wood, I only have to make 1 up from the strip wood. So off to do that and get these in place. Then I got to drill the holes through them for the truss rods, and I think I will do that just with my pin vise and drill bit in there very carefully. And there will be 16 of those holes I have to drill. Alrighty, more staring and comparing paid off. Alrighty, just an aside, I didn't want to put this in the middle of the eventual build video on the covered bridge. It would just make it much too long, but I did want to give you a good example of what I was talking about in that earlier video. So, as always, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you have not already done so, please subscribe to my channel. Okay, I'll be talking to you again soon, and in the meantime, happy modeling.